Well, good morning, everybody. This is David here, coming to you from the land of enchantment. I thought I'd do a video on what has NASA done, being that this is the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11. So excited about that. So, what exactly has NASA done? Do you ever think about that? I know I hear it all the time. Do you really want to know? Can you handle the truth? So here's this week's joke. Hope you like it. What are people called that work for NASA? Think about that. So let's look at the historic funding for NASA. In total, over 60 years, NASA has had a budget of $601 billion. This is a far cry from the trillions that flat earthers report. Several times I've heard them say, NASA makes trillions of dollars of our tax money. During the years before the first moon landing, NASA had its largest budget as about 4% of the federal budget. So take note of that, 4%. In 1966, that amount was $6 billion. As you can see from the graph, the NASA budget was cut drastically in 1975 and has a steady drop since then. And this is the percentages of the federal budget. The average spending for NASA for 60 years has been about $10 billion per year. So once again, a far cry from trillions of dollars. In 2018, the NASA budget was $19.1 billion. This is now 0.49% of the United States federal budget, which is $4.4 trillion. Can you think about that? I can't even fathom what $1 trillion is. In 2019, the NASA budget is $19.9 billion, and this is still 0.49% of the U.S. federal budget. I have a quote. It says, the budget request, which was released today on February 12th, allocates about $19.9 billion to NASA. That's an increase of $370 million over last year's request. Here's a big thing to notice. The proposal zeroes out funding for the International Space Station in 2025 and allocates $150 million to encourage development of the new commercial low Earth orbital platforms and capabilities for use by the private sector and NASA. This comes from www.space.com. And you all remember, I think it was just maybe a month ago or so, when NASA reported that commercial operations could now go to the space station. So, according to percentages, NASA has lost over 90% of its funding since 1966. Now, just think about that if your boss were to come in and say, I'm giving you a 90% cut in pay. How does that affect your budget. We're all made aware, again, this is a big NASA thing. NASA spends $55 million per day of the federal budget. And let's see where that all goes. So what does NASA do with all that money? In 2018, here's just a few big projects. 100 space missions total. 40 of those are in preparation. They launched the Solar Probe Plus, which is now orbiting the Sun. Transiting Exoplanet Survey Satellite, TESS. The InSight Mars Lander. The James Webb Space Telescope, which they're still working on. Mars Rover. In 2019, they're working on creating space habitats, Space Launch System rocket, the Orion spacecraft, humans into deep space, and again, they're still working on the James Webb Telescope. NASA has 17.2 thousand employees. So more than 17,000 employees. Let's say their average salary is $50,000 per year. I know that sounds high, but there are some highly paid administrators. So if you multiply that out, the total cost is $850 million per year, almost $1 billion. NASA has over 100 contractors, and each company has employees which are paid by NASA. I couldn't find any specific numbers on number of employees and all that. NASA has 10 major facilities in the U.S. and many smaller facilities. This is like Johnson Space Center, Kennedy Space Center, JPL, places like that. Those are major facilities. And of course, you know, it takes money to run a major facility like that. Then there are also NASA facilities across the world, telescopes and such. This link I have here is a list of 12 USA sites where there are ground-based projects planned. For example, just so you understand, Texas disasters, quantification of damage to urban tree inventories in Texas following Hurricane Harvey. So there's the link to that. Another thing they have is the NASA Space Foundation, which was founded in Colorado Springs in 1983. The Space Foundation is the world's premier organization to inspire, educate, connect, and advocate on behalf of the global space community. They are a nonprofit leader in space awareness activities, educational programs, major industry events, including the annual Space Symposium to be held each April. So NASA does do some nonprofit work. Here's another example. NASA is contributing to saving the lives of hundreds of thousands of children in the worst hit areas of Syria. Again, NASA does do nonprofit charity work. So just to give you an idea of other projects and how they compare to NASA, here are some kind of unusual projects that the federal government has sponsored. These are non-NASA projects. They built a swanky bus stop for $1 million. One bus stop had Wi-Fi and heated seats and stuff like that. Another one, advertising to get likes on social media, $630,000 for that. NEH funded program to study romance novels, $940 million. Or I'm sorry, $914,000. Dangerous solar panels at the Boston airport. Turned out that the way they built them, the reflection of the sun blinded pilots, and that was $3.5 million. The federal government also did a couple study. This study proved that couples were happier when the woman calms down after an argument. $325,525. The FBI did a movie study to make sure that details are correct in movies featuring the FBI. $1.5 million. They did a 5-year study of drinking habits of college students. The conclusion of this study was that frat boys drink more than their peers, and everyone drinks more on game day. $5 million they spent on that. The IRS finds licenses for unused software. The costs for that is $239 million. This was a really good one, I thought. The National Guard spent $136 million to sponsor a race car. This was for advertising for the National Guard. So out of that, they got 24,800 recruiting prospects, but only 20 of those met qualifications, and not a single one joined the National Guard. So there you go. How do you like that? I also often hear NASA technologies don't affect our real day-to-day life. It's just a waste of money to study space. So let me show you just one or two things that NASA technologies do affect our everyday lives. And there is the link for that on Wikipedia. You can find that very easily. So number one, health and medicine. NASA helped develop artificial heart, artificial limbs. They developed the thermometer that you put in your ear. Number two, transportation. They helped develop improved radial tires. Number three, public safety. Their technology was used for landmine removal. Number four, consumer, home, and recreation. Some of their technology was used for swimsuits. I think you remember, at least I do, the Olympic swimmers, and they had these high-tech swimsuits that helped them swim faster. Number five, environmental and agricultural resources. NASA developed water purification. Number six, computer technology. NASA developed structural analysis software. Those of you that are engineers know what structural analysis is. They also have a software catalog that has over 1,600 freely available programs. You can go and download free programs from NASA. Number 7, industrial productivity. They develop powdered lubricants. So what I wanted you to see, these are just a very few of the things that NASA technology has helped develop, or they've actually developed. And you can look up and see many, many other things that you'd be really surprised about. One that I forgot to put in here is the miniature camera that's used on your smartphone that was developed by NASA. So my conclusion here is that NASA does not have this huge giant budget that they waste money and spend our tax money every day on nothing. They have many, many, many space projects. I heard just the other day, every time they send a rocket into space, cost $1 billion. So there's a lot of projects going on, a lot of new things. We're expected to land on the moon by 2025. There's just a lot of stuff that NASA does. NASA affects our day-to-day life with all kinds of technology that you would just be surprised at all of the places where NASA has touched our lives. And you can also see that there are just many, many other departments and budgets that are just could be considered wasted money, far more than NASA would use for our tax money every day. So that's what I hope you get out of this presentation. So this week's joke, you guys, what are people called that work for NASA? Did you think about it? What are people called that work for NASA? And by the way, I saw this on an honest to goodness website. Question from a viewer. What are people called that work for NASA? Here you go. They're called NASA employees.